Evan Holloway was the golden boy of Ridgeview High. Quiet, smart, polite. His sister, Lily, adored him. His parents trusted him. His best friend Trevor never doubted him. But on one storm-soaked night, Evan snapped. By morning, one family member was dead, two were clinging to life, and Evan himself lay in a body bag. The cause? A single fake pill, taken hours before. What happened inside the Holloway home wasn't just a tragedy, it was a descent into madness that no one saw coming. And the most chilling part, it all started with a lie disguised as a high. Willow Creek was the kind of town that made people feel safe. Nestled between thick woods and quiet hills, its charm came from the simplicity of life. White picket fences lined the streets. Kids rode their bikes without fear. Neighbors knew each other by name and waved from their porches. Crime was almost unheard of. The loudest sound at night was the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant rustling of trees swaying in the wind. The Holloway family lived near the edge of town, in a modest two-story home that overlooked the forest line. Their house was warm and full of life. John Holloway, the father, was a retired firefighter, known for his bravery and strong sense of discipline. He had saved more lives than he could count, yet his proudest achievements were inside that house. Maria, his wife, was the school nurse, gentle, watchful, and always the first to spot when something was wrong with a student. Their two children, Evan and Lily, were opposite. Evan, 17, was reserved and thoughtful, often lost in books and music. Lily, only 10, was bubbly and talkative, always asking questions and making up stories. Life in the Holloway home seemed perfectly ordinary. Every morning John would sip his coffee while reading the newspaper. Maria packed lunches and reminded the kids to wear their jackets. In the evenings, they all gathered around the TV or played board games. They weren't wealthy, but they were happy, or so it seemed. Outside the family, there was one more person who played an important role in their lives: Trevor Maddox. Trevor was in his early 30s, single, and had been close to John since his days at the firehouse. He had no family of his own, so the Holloways became his second home. He had watched Evan grow up, and had been there when Lily was born. He was more than a family friend, he was a trusted guardian figure. The kids even called him Uncle Trevor, though he wasn't related by blood. But in the months leading up to that October, something began to shift in the atmosphere. Something subtle, almost invisible but real. It began with Evan. He became distant, not in a dramatic way, but quietly. He no longer joined family dinners with the same energy. His responses became short, his eyes seemed darker, as if they were always focusing on something far away. His room became his retreat. The once curious boy who had loved hiking through the woods with his dad now preferred the glow of a computer screen. He started staying up late, browsing forums with strange names, reading posts from anonymous users with wild ideas about other worlds, government mind control and chemical doors to reality. No one noticed right away. Teens go through phases, after all. Even Maria, who made a career out of noticing when children were unwell, chalked it up to senior year pressure. Trevor did notice, though. He saw how Evan twitched slightly when someone touched his shoulder, how his laughter never quite reached his eyes. One afternoon, Trevor brought it up to John during a football game. John shrugged it off. Evan was just becoming a man, figuring things out. "He's a smart kid," John had said. "He'll be fine." But Evan wasn't fine. Deep inside, he was changing. He was reading things online that fed a growing sense of unease. He had stumbled across a message thread titled "The Veil is a Lie." At first, it read like science fiction, but the more he read, the more he believed. Posts warned of the world being a simulation, of people around you not being real, of certain chemicals that could reveal the truth, and Evan was curious. Too curious. Willow Creek remained quiet. The neighbors smiled. The birds chirped. But within the Holloway house, something dark was brewing. A storm that no one could see was slowly building, and when it broke, it would shatter everything they thought they knew about safety, family, and the human mind. Evan Holloway had always been different. but not in a way that raised alarms. He wasn't the rebellious type, nor was he overly shy. He existed in the quiet space between a boy with a sharp mind and a quiet mouth. Teachers described him as focused, while peers called him off. He wasn't antisocial, but he didn't crave attention. He had a few friends but often preferred his own company. To most he was just another teenager riding the waves of adolescence. But underneath his still surface, something had begun to shift. It started with an interest in altered perception. At first, it was just curiosity. Evan had always liked reading about psychology, dreams, even lucid dreaming. But as time passed, the topics grew darker, stranger. His online history was a rabbit hole of obscure forums, cryptic YouTube channels, and eerie subreddits. He began bookmarking pages with titles like Reality Layers, The Chemical Key, and Waking Up from the Illusion. These weren't just science blogs or articles. They were user-generated dumps of erratic theories, tangled with paranoia and coded language. Evan was drawn to it all. The posts promised a kind of awakening. People shared stories of taking unregulated compounds and seeing through the world. Some spoke of shape-shifting people, hidden dimensions, and a force that masked the true nature of life. They insisted that nothing was what it seemed, and that only a rare few could handle the truth. This community fed Evan's growing sense of isolation. The more he read, the more he began to believe that the world was a lie, and that his family was part of the illusion. He stumbled across a name that kept reappearing: Vanta. It was described as a gateway substance, stronger than LSD or DMT, but more focused. The users claimed it unlocked not just hallucinations, but a kind of cognitive X-ray vision, seeing people for who or what they really were. The effects were unpredictable and terrifying, yet the allure was undeniable. It was rare, expensive, and untraceable. Sold anonymously through encrypted messaging apps, it arrived in discreet packaging, no return address, no markings. Some called it fake, others called it a gift. Evan couldn't stop thinking about it. Late at night, while his parents were asleep and the house was silent, he'd lie in bed scrolling endlessly. He read testimonials from strangers who swore Vanta had changed their lives, made them see through the masks. The message that echoed most was simple but powerful. If you feel like you don't belong, it's because you don't. That line stuck with Evan. He began to question everything: his memories, his daily routines. Even his sister's laugh started to feel rehearsed. Something about his family's affection began to seem off, like they were performing love, instead of feeling it. Trevor noticed small signs. Evan had lost weight. His skin looked pale under the dim kitchen lights. His eyes were tired, even when he claimed he'd slept all night. Trevor tried to pull him aside once to talk, but Evan brushed him off. There was something cold in the boy's tone, a quiet defensiveness that hadn't been there before. Behind the locked door of his bedroom, Evan's world was splitting in two, the one everyone saw, and the one he was convinced existed underneath it all. Eventually he found a cellar. The instructions were coded and vague. The package would arrive within a week. That week, Evan barely ate. He barely spoke. At dinner, he stared at his parents like he was analyzing their faces for imperfections. Signs that they weren't real. When Maria touched his hand to pass him the salt, he flinched. John asked if everything was okay. Evan nodded but didn't blink. The night the package arrived, it was raining. A plain envelope was left in the mailbox. No name, no warning. Inside was a single strip of chemically treated paper and a handwritten note with just one sentence: "Only take when alone." Evan didn't sleep that night. He just sat at his desk, staring at the strip, waiting for the moment when the veil would lift and the truth would be revealed. He had no idea that moment would destroy everything. The rain had been falling for hours, a steady, rhythmic tapping against the Holloway house's windows. It was the kind of night that made everything feel heavier, darker. The skies were swollen and gray, and the wind came in occasional gusts that made the old oak trees creak like warning signs. Inside the house, Everything was still. John and Maria had gone to bed early. Lily had fallen asleep on the living room floor with her stuffed bunny clutched to her chest, cartoons flickering silently on the muted TV. And upstairs in the furthest room at the end of the hallway, Evan was preparing to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He had waited 3 days since the package arrived. 3 days of walking through life like a ghost, carrying the thin strip of paper with him everywhere, in his wallet, in his pocket, under his pillow. He had read every post again, double-checked every warning. Only take when alone. Must be mentally prepared. Truth is not reversible. The language wasn't medical. It wasn't scientific. It was cryptic, dramatic, and drenched in mystery. But Evan believed it. Not blindly, but with the kind of calculated obsession that builds slowly, like a splinter burrowing deeper into skin. He turned off the lights and sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor. The strip sat in the palm of his hand like a fragile secret. He looked around his room, taking in the familiarity: posters on the wall, his bookshelf, the old trophy from a middle school science fair. These things had meant something once. Now, they felt like props on a stage. Evan placed the strip on his tongue and waited. The first few minutes were uneventful. He focused on his breathing, just as the posts had recommended. His heart rate climbed. Sweat collected on his forehead. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch and curl at the edges. Then came the shift. It wasn't a high, it was a rupture. The walls didn't melt, and the ceiling didn't spin. Instead, reality seemed to fragment. The soft hum of his ceiling fan grew louder, sharper, as if it were speaking in some coded frequency. His vision pulsed. Colors began to feel wrong. Familiar items in his room started to look duplicated, off. The light from his lamp felt artificial, like a stage light revealing a false set. Then, the paranoia set in. He stood up, hands trembling, convinced someone was in the room with him. The closet door creaked slightly, even though it hadn't moved. His reflection in the window didn't match his movements exactly. The books on the shelf seemed to rearrange themselves when he wasn't looking. The air felt thick, buzzing with unseen energy. And then the thought, sharp, absolute, took hold. They're not my family. His mind connected dots that weren't there. He remembered Maria humming in the kitchen that morning, how the tune had seemed unfamiliar. He remembered John's grip during their last handshake, too firm, too rehearsed. He remembered Lily asking him what his favorite animal was, even though she'd asked the same question 100 times before. She's testing me, he thought. They all are. Panic and delusion merged into a single, unstoppable current. Evan began pacing, then moving faster, muttering to himself. The walls of the house weren't protecting him. They were keeping him in. He felt hunted, watched. Every creak of the old wooden floor downstairs sounded like a trap being sprung. He suddenly knew what he had to do. Not out of anger, not out of fear, but out of survival. He was convinced he had seen behind the mask, and now the masks wanted him gone. There was no more family, only imposters. From the hallway came a soft sound, the floor groaning under a shifting weight. Lily, perhaps, or Maria checking to make sure the doors were locked. Evan froze. His eyes widened. His hand reached for the desk drawer. Inside was a knife he used for art projects. It gleamed under the flickering light. Downstairs, the rest of the Holloway family remained unaware that their son had just stepped out of reality and into a nightmare they couldn't escape. The clock in the hallway struck midnight, its chime faint and slow, almost drowned by the sound of rain rising against the windows. Inside the Holloway house, silence had returned, soft and heavy, the kind that makes every small noise feel magnified. But upstairs the air was anything but calm. Evan stood in his doorway, unmoving, his bare feet rooted to the wooden floor. In his right hand the knife felt alive, pulsing with his heartbeat. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel, dim and warped, lit only by the weak glow of a nightlight, near Lily's room. His breathing was shallow. In his mind, the world was no longer safe. He believed his family had been replaced, imitated perfectly, but not perfectly enough. Their movements too mechanical, their words too measured. They had studied him, he thought, watched his every move for years, waiting for him to lower his guard. But now he had seen behind the curtain. He could feel the danger in their presence. He no longer believed he was in his home. He believed he was in a cage. The first stop was the living room. He moved silently, like prey trying to outmaneuver a predator, but convinced he was the one being hunted. The flickering television still cast light across the floor, illuminating Maria's sleeping figure on the couch. She had stayed up late waiting for the storm to ease. Her face looked peaceful, unaware of the horror only feet away. Evan stepped closer. His eyes twitched as if processing thousands of thoughts at once. In his mind, Maria was not asleep. She was powered down, waiting to reboot. She wasn't his mother anymore. She was something else, wearing her skin. The knife trembled in his grip, the metal cold, the handle slick with sweat. What happened next was fast, silent, precise, and devastating. She didn't scream. There was only a short gasp, followed by a sharp exhale that hung in the air like a ghost. Evan stared down at her, breathing hard, heart thundering in his chest. He expected her to transform, to reveal the monster beneath. But she didn't. She just lay still, her eyes slowly fading, her expression frozen in confusion and pain. Then came the footsteps. John had heard something, a shuffle, maybe a thump. Years of being a firefighter had sharpened his instincts. He moved fast, but not fast enough. When he entered the living room, he stopped cold. The sight of Maria, the blood, the knife in Evan's hand, it didn't register right away. Then it did. Evan, he tried to say something, anything, but Evan lunged at him with the sudden speed of someone who no longer feared consequence. The struggle was brutal and wordless. John was strong, but older. Evan was fueled by fear and hallucination, each strike driven by the belief that he was fighting for his life. They crashed into the coffee table, toppling furniture. A lamp fell and shattered. The room became a whirlwind of motion and noise, shadows jumping with every flash of lightning outside. John managed to knock the knife from Evan's hand, but it was too late. He had been wounded deeply. Blood soaked through his shirt as he groaned and collapsed beside the couch. His hand reached out instinctively, not to fight, but to shield Lily, who had woken and crept halfway down the stairs, drawn by the noise. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stood frozen, small hands gripping the stair rail, eyes wide with incomprehension. Evan saw her. For a moment, something in him faltered, a flicker of recognition, of doubt. But then his mind twisted again. She knows. She's part of them. But Lily didn't wait. She turned and ran back up the stairs, disappearing into the shadows. Evan picked up the knife again, breathing ragged, sweat pouring down his back. Somewhere upstairs a door slammed. Somewhere outside, thunder rumbled. And in the middle of that once peaceful home, a nightmare was unfolding, one that would stain every room, every memory with a horror no one could ever explain. The storm outside had swelled into a violent frenzy, its wind howling like a siren through the trees. Lightning split the sky with white-hot cracks, illuminating the Holloway house in flashes that felt more like warnings than light. Inside, the chaos had left an eerie silence in its wake. The living room was a shattered scene of blood, broken furniture and still bodies. The quiet was deceptive, because the real storm was still moving, barefoot and wide-eyed through the house. Evan crept up the stairs, slowly, blade in hand, leaving behind footprints smudged with crimson. Every step groaned beneath his weight, but he heard none of it. In his mind a war was underway, and he was the last person awake. The hallucinations were no longer just strange visuals. They were convincing lies, stitched into every sound and shadow. His perception had fully fractured. He saw shapes moving where there were none. He believed the walls were listening. Every door looked like a trap. Above him, Lily had vanished into her bedroom and locked the door behind her. She was crouched in the closet, clutching her stuffed bunny, her breath short and fast. Her mind was too young to make sense of what she had seen. All she knew was that something terrible had happened downstairs, and that the person she loved most in the world was no longer her brother. She could hear his footsteps now, climbing, getting closer. Each creak of the staircase made her shudder deeper into the closet's darkness. Meanwhile, in a house only 2 blocks away, Trevor Maddox couldn't sleep. He had been uneasy all evening. Something about Evan had been haunting him for weeks. Those empty eyes, that cold distance, the way he looked through people rather than at them. Trevor had planned to visit the Holloways the next morning to check in again. But tonight, as the wind lashed against his window, he felt something heavier, a dread he couldn't shake. When the power flickered, he got up and looked out the window toward the direction of their house. He couldn't see much, but the silhouette of the home against the tree line looked strange, too dark, too still. His phone buzzed. A single message from John. "Come now." No explanation. Just those 2 words. Trevor didn't hesitate. He grabbed his keys, a flashlight, and rushed out the door without even locking it behind him. As he drove through the storm, his gut twisted with a fear he couldn't yet name. Back in the Holloway house, Evan stood outside Lily's door. He could hear the soft scraping of her movement behind it. He didn't call her name. In his mind, she wasn't Lily anymore. She was an echo, a shadow, something left behind by the people who had built this simulation around him. He raised the knife and pressed it gently to the doorframe, tracing the wood, listening for the sound of fear on the other side. Then, from downstairs, a sound. A knock. 3 sharp raps on the front door. Evan flinched, turning his head suddenly. The sound didn't make sense. No one was supposed to be there. No one could exist outside the illusion, but someone was knocking, someone real. Trevor stood on the porch, drenched in rain, flashlight in one hand, the other curled into a fist against the door. He leaned in and listened, hearing nothing. Just wind and silence. He knocked again. Inside, Evan was frozen halfway down the stairs, knife still in hand, trying to decide if the visitor was another trick or something else entirely. And upstairs, behind a locked door, a 10-year-old girl sat trembling in the dark, praying for someone, anyone, to save her. Trevor stood in the rain, water dripping from his jacket, his knuckles red from pounding on the Holloway's front door. He could barely hear anything beyond the storm. The porch light was off, and the house looked darker than usual, like it had folded in on itself. He knocked again, harder this time. No answer. Something felt off, wrong in a way he couldn't yet explain. He tried the handle. It turned. The door creaked open slowly. He called out, softly, at first, then louder. No reply, just the sound of wind slipping through cracks in the house. The darkness inside seemed alive, thick with a quiet Trevor had never felt in this home before. He stepped in. Flashlight beam cutting through the black. What he saw first made him stop cold. The floor was smeared with something dark. Shattered glass sparkled from a broken lamp. A couch cushion had been torn, and furniture lay at odd angles. Trevor stepped forward, slowly sweeping his light across the room. And then he saw them. Maria, slumped on the floor, her face pale and still. John beside her, unmoving, blood seeping from his chest and pooling beneath him. Trevor's breath caught in his throat. His legs nearly buckled. For a long second, he couldn't move. His brain refused to believe what his eyes were showing him. The warmth of the room had been stripped away. This was a tomb now. He crouched down, checked John's pulse. Faint, but still there. Maria was gone. Trevor's mind kicked into motion. He pulled his phone out to call 911, hands trembling so badly he almost dropped it. As he dialed, he suddenly heard something, movement from above. Creaks on the stairs. He looked up, flashlight raised. A shadow moved. Trevor slowly stood, phone to his ear, the dispatcher's voice just beginning to come through. He didn't speak. He was staring at the staircase, frozen, watching as someone came into view. It was Evan. He stood on the stairs barefoot, clothes soaked in sweat and blood, his face unreadable. The knife dangled from his hand, red and gleaming. His eyes locked onto Trevor's, but there was no recognition, no emotion, only silence. Trevor spoke the boy's name once, quietly, not as a question but as a plea. Evan didn't respond. The flashlight beam shook as Trevor backed up a step. The dispatcher was asking for his location, repeating the question, but he couldn't answer. He was too focused on the teenager standing above him like a statue carved from a nightmare. Then Evan moved. He descended the stairs, slowly, blade scraping the railing as he walked. Each step was deliberate, measured, as though he weren't chasing Trevor, but closing in on something inevitable. Trevor had known Evan since he was a child, had watched him grow up. Now he didn't recognize him at all. Trevor raised the flashlight higher, temporarily blinding Evan. It was enough. He turned and ran toward the kitchen, ducking behind the island as Evan lunged. The knife swung wide and hit the cabinet door, splintering wood. Trevor shouted into the phone now, screaming their address, begging for police and an ambulance. Evan was circling the kitchen island slowly, blade gripped tight again. It was a standoff. Every time Trevor moved, Evan mirrored him. Upstairs, Lily could hear everything. The voices, the thuds, the crash of something shattering. She squeezed her eyes shut and covered her ears, but the sounds kept coming. She didn't know who was still alive. She didn't know if help was really here or if it was just part of the nightmare. And Evan? He wasn't thinking about escape. He wasn't thinking about survival. In his mind, Trevor was the final piece, the last pretender, the final mask to pull away. He had seen too much, and Evan wasn't going to stop now. He believed this was the only way to wake up for good. The knife gleamed with each flicker of lightning through the shattered living room window. Evan stood still in the doorway of the kitchen, watching Trevor with a gaze that was both vacant and intense. His breathing had become slow and controlled, as if he were pacing himself for something final. Trevor crouched behind the kitchen island, gripping the handle of a broken drawer like a weapon, heart pounding so hard he thought it might give him away. Rainwater dripped from Trevor's jacket and pooled around his knees. The storm outside had grown wilder, pushing wind and water through the broken glass, as though nature itself was trying to force its way inside to witness what was unfolding. The air smelled of blood, wood polish, and electricity, a mix that made Trevor's stomach churn. He had never seen anything like this. Not in books, not in the news, not in his nightmare. Evan tilted his head, eyes still fixed on Trevor. Something in his mind had locked into place, a mission only he could understand. He raised the knife again, not to threaten, but to finish what he thought had been started. Then came the sirens, distant at first, then louder. The wail of approaching police and ambulances echoed through the storm and bounced off the walls of the quiet neighborhood. The red and blue lights bled into the house through the blinds like ghostly warnings. Trevor's breath caught in his throat. Relief was within reach. But Evan didn't flinch. He didn't turn toward the windows. The sound didn't reach him. He stepped closer. Trevor knew he had only seconds. He grabbed the drawer, surged forward, and shoved it into Evan's side with all the force he could muster. The teenager stumbled backward with a grunt, not from pain, but from being caught off balance. His hand scraped against the counter. The knife fell to the floor with a clatter. Trevor dove for it. Evan reacted instantly, throwing himself forward. They both crashed to the ground, struggling in the mess of broken furniture, slippery tiles and blood. The fight was animalistic, brutal. There was no technique, only survival. Evan fought with wild, unrelenting energy, fueled by the delusions flooding his brain. Trevor, heavier and older, fought with desperation and fear. In the scramble, the knife slid across the floor and stopped near the foot of the staircase. Evan broke free and ran for it. But suddenly, another sound. A thud from upstairs. Evan froze. Footsteps. He turned his head slowly, eyes moving toward the staircase, drawn to the soft creak of a step. At the top stood Lily, small, pale, eyes wide and tear-filled. Her bunny was still in her hand, but her fear had changed. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was staring directly at him, her brother, who no longer looked like himself. Evan's expression changed. For the first time, something cracked. His grip on the nightmare loosened just slightly. Confusion swept across his face, as if seeing Lily had disturbed the hallucination. He blinked rapidly, taking a step back, mouth slightly open. The front door burst open. Officers flooded into the house, weapons drawn, voices commanding. Flashlights scanned the room, lighting up every inch. Evan turned just as the beams hit his face. The confusion returned to terror. He raised his hands instinctively, but his eyes flicked back toward the knife, still near the stairs. Everything slowed. Trevor screamed for them not to shoot. One officer moved in cautiously, shouting orders, telling Evan to lie down. But he didn't seem to hear. His hands twitched toward the knife. His body shifted like he might run. And then a shot rang out. Just one. Evan collapsed. Trevor rushed forward, yelling that he was unarmed now, that it was over. Officers swarmed in. EMTs followed close behind. The house, once silent in its horror, erupted into chaos. Commands, questions, the shouts of medics trying to save lives. But for Lily, none of it mattered. She stood motionless at the top of the stairs, staring at the boy who had once been her brother. He had been swallowed by something invisible, something she couldn't name, and though the storm outside had finally begun to weaken, inside the Holloway house, the damage had already been done. Morning broke slowly over the quiet town, but there was no warmth in the light that filtered through the clouds. Yellow police tape fluttered in the wind around the Holloway house, now a crime scene soaked in tragedy. The storm had passed, but its damage lingered, not just in broken branches or flooded gutters, but in the silence that surrounded what was once a family home. Inside, the aftermath had begun to settle like dust. Investigators moved carefully through the halls, their footsteps soft, their voices hushed. Blood had dried on the kitchen tiles. The couch in the living room, once where Maria dozed off during rainy nights, was now soaked with grief. Photographs of happier times still hung on the walls, untouched, eerie reminders of a life shattered beyond repair. Evan's body had been taken away hours earlier. The shot had hit him in the shoulder and exited through his back. But it was the fall that ended his life. He'd hit his head on the corner of the table during the collapse. Medics tried to resuscitate him, but it was too late. What haunted those who witnessed it was not just the violence, it was the expression on his face in those final moments. Not rage, not fear. Confusion. A hollow gaze, as though even he didn't know how he got there. John was in critical condition, rushed into surgery the moment EMTs arrived. His pulse was weak, his breathing shallow, but he fought. Doctors worked through the night, trying to undo the damage his son had inflicted. When the sun rose, he was alive, but unconscious. No one could say when or if he would wake up. Trevor sat in a waiting room chair, hands stained with dried blood, still in the same clothes from the night before. Every so often, he looked at the door, as if expecting someone to walk through and tell him none of this had happened. But no one came. The police had already interviewed him, again and again. What had Evan taken? Why did he snap? Did anyone see signs? Trevor had answered the best he could, but nothing made sense, not yet. The pills were still in Evan's room, small, blue, and unmarked. A toxicology report would later confirm they were laced with a synthetic compound. Something designed to mimic LSD but far more dangerous, especially for undeveloped minds. The drug was traced back to a student 3 towns over, someone who'd been experimenting with homemade hallucinogens. Evan had no idea what he was taking, and it took only 1 dose. Lily was in protective custody for now, under close watch by a child psychologist. She hadn't spoken since the incident. She sat curled in a chair at the precinct, her stuffed bunny clenched in her arms. When asked questions, she only stared at the floor. No one wanted to push her. Not yet. She was the only one who had seen all of it, from the first scream to the final shot. Her silence spoke more than words ever could. The town was shaken. News vans parked along the curb, reporters whispering into microphones about a quiet family torn apart in a single night. Neighbors left flowers at the gate, unsure what else to do. Rumors spread quickly about the drug, about Evan's behavior, about what had really happened behind closed doors. But none of it changed the facts. A promising teenager was dead. A mother was gone. A father lay unconscious in a hospital bed. And a child had witnessed the unthinkable. In the end, there was no clear reason, no satisfying answer. Just a cocktail of fear, paranoia, and a single deadly mistake. One moment of curiosity had led to irreversible destruction. The most chilling part was how ordinary it all seemed before the fall, how easily it could have happened to anyone. The Holloway home remained empty, its windows dark and its story whispered in hushed tones. No one would what had happened there, not because of the bloodshed, but because it began like so many others, with a teenager just trying something once,